Caleb Kruckenberg is a litigation counsel at New Civil Liberties Alliance. They're our new friends. And Caleb, as I've said before, you guys do what the ACLU used to do. We've been talking to you, I guess, a number of months now about this whole, in general, the overview is all these federal agencies that have taken on all three branches of government's responsibility. But in particular, this moratorium on evictions, which has had a lot of stuff's happened since we last chatted. Update us.
Well, that is something of an understatement. There's been a lot going on, and the sort of the good news is that several courts around the country have agreed with what we've been saying all along, and that the CDC does not have the lawful authority to tell state courts that they cannot operate and tell property owners it's a crime to evict tenants who don't pay rent. So that's the good news. The bad news, or the limited news, is those decisions are very limited. And there was a decision from the District of Columbia, a federal judge in the District of Columbia last week, and she declared the eviction order was invalid nationwide, but then she agreed to stay that decision while the government appeals. So as it stands right now, it's a little unclear, and there are a lot of jurisdictions that are still following the eviction moratorium order.
And we've had another federal agency jump in too. The consumer protection folks have jumped in and done something else, and you guys are on top of that one too, right?
Well, that's right. And so, one of the things that we've seen with the eviction moratorium is, it's supposed to be limited. Originally, they issued it in September. It was going to expire in December. And then they extended it. And then they extended it. And then they extended it again. And we keep hoping that they won't extend it. And unfortunately, I think that they are definitely going to do so, because the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau just issued a rule saying, hey, the eviction moratorium is in effect. And in fact, if you own property and you try to collect rent from people, you have to tell them, you have to tell all of your tenants that the eviction moratorium order applies, and it might protect them. The thing is, the eviction moratorium is illegal, and in some jurisdictions it's been held illegal, but the CFPB, the agency, has now told people that, you have to make these disclosures that aren't actually true, and if you don't, we're going to sue you. We're going to enforce the law against you. We're going to make you pay fines.
So this is insanity, right? I mean, this is, hey, I'm here to collect the rent, but I'm obligated by law to tell you don't have to pay me.
Right. And so, well, and what you can do, right? You can say, you don't have to pay me, and you're actually protected by an eviction moratorium that doesn't exist, or that doesn't actually protect you. You are encouraged to lie to your tenants about that.
So when we first started chatting about this, you warned about the other part of this, and I don't know if this has been fixed. As a landlord, see, most people think, well, they're just rich. They'll just reach in their pocket. They'll be okay. A lot of these property owners have mortgages, and they have expenses. They have property taxes and all these things. There are no moratoriums on all those things. So one of the things you alerted us to was the fact that these people are then set up for being foreclosed on by bigger entities, which apparently are not covered by the eviction moratorium. Is that still the case?
That is the case. And unfortunately, I remember the first time we talked about this, I said, there are going to be people who are going to lose their houses because of the eviction moratorium. And it's happened. I've talked to them. People have called me and they've said, you're exactly right. I can't pay the mortgage on the property, so I went into foreclosure. And guess what? The banks are allowed to take the property. The banks are allowed to evict anyone they want to. And this just illustrates why we don't want an agency like the CDC making these kinds of choices. The CDC basically stuck its nose in the national housing policy, which it doesn't have any expertise in. It doesn't know the first thing about. And they've created a disaster for property owners. But, as you mentioned, I've been involved in this a long time. NCLA is continuing to fight this. And so we are fighting the Eviction Moratorium order. And actually, coming up on May 14th, I'll be arguing in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals the first case to go on appeal about the Eviction Moratorium order. I'm hopeful that the court is going to invalidate it. And as you mentioned with this new consumer financial protection rule, I just filed a lawsuit a week ago, and we sought a temporary restraining order to stop this rule from taking effect nationwide.
So what happens to these people who have already lost their investments? Is there any recovery method for them later? I mean, if this thing's ultimately going to end up in the Supreme Court, is that a fair assumption?
I think that's right. I think it's ultimately going to go up there. And the real sad part here is there's not much people can do that have been harmed by it. You can't sue the government and get money for this kind of thing. The government doesn't owe you damage for what they've done to you. The only thing we can really do is stop the agency from doing it, and also have the court say very clearly, not only was it wrong for the agency to do this in the first place, they can never do something like this again. They don't have this kind of power. They are not allowed to intrude on these rights. And I think given the CFPB's recent actions, that is a very important message, because until the courts say that, I think the agencies in this administration, they're going to keep pushing it. They're going to come up with new things, new sort of outrages that take away people's civil liberties.
Is this, I hate to get super conspiratorial here, but I'm wondering if some people are happy this is going on because you're wiping out private property ownership in favor of big banks and faceless bureaucrats, right?
Well, I think that's going to be the result. From my perspective, I think the amount of thinking that went on over at the agency was pretty simple. They said, property owners are unpopular, tenants are popular. We're going to just issue an order telling people you're never allowed to evict people no matter what, no matter how long they haven't paid your rent. And we're going to score this little political victory without actually thinking about what we're doing, without even, without wrestling with the real consequences of what they were doing. And that's what happens when you have a bureaucrat setting nationwide policy. They can make these kinds of decisions without thinking about it, without appreciating the consequences. And then they have no accountability to the public. I mean, these people weren't elected. They just issue these rules.
So these are going to kind of walk us through. So you've argued a couple of these cases, various jurisdictions. This is what the 11th Circuit's going to, have some of these cases been combined, or is this just one case?
Well, so this is a case where I represent a number of property owners. I also represent the National Apartment Association, which has over 5,000 members. And it's a big organization of people who own property and have been affected by this. And if we're successful, we'll have the first appellate court saying that nationwide this eviction order is invalid. And I think that's very important, because right now there's sort of piecemeal. We have a couple of good decisions from district courts, from federal judges saying, the eviction order is invalid against certain people or in certain places. But I think once we get a court of appeals to say that, I think that's when people are going to have to take it seriously. And honestly, I think the CDC, if we're successful, will appeal to the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court will agree with us. I think the Supreme Court will agree that the CDC has no business doing this. And unfortunately, I think that's really going to be how we're going to resolve this issue. In dog years, how long does this take to get to the Supreme Court? Well, I'll tell you, this is fast for courts. And in real life, it is incredibly frustrating and slow. Because, look, I have clients who, they're affected by this every single day. And the eviction moratorium has been in effect for 9 months. And that is an outrageous amount of time to force someone to have no income and incur all their normal expenses. It is hard to overstate how much of an outrage it is that an administrative agency has done this.
I've got to believe there's now there are other remedies, right? There is, you can redeem property that has been foreclosed on, right? There's still a period there you can try to get it back. And I guess on property taxes, I guess some people have lost at tax sales too, right? There have been multiple levels of other damage done by government agencies and large companies to these property owners, right?
That's absolutely right. And actually, I was in a meeting with a client yesterday, one of my clients in this case. And, if all of this wasn't enough, the county raised his property tax assessment by 40% this year.
Oh, so, my Lord.
It's unfortunately, this is all, it seems part of a pattern. But, it's really untenable, and it's really unfortunate what's happened. But I continue to be optimistic that the courts are going to give us something that makes no bones about what's happened and is very clear and takes the agency to task for what it's done to people.
Wow. I'm sitting here in disbelief because I'm watching it. One of this idea that, the only difference between us and Mexico and a lot of these third world countries is we have a flourishing middle class. And within that are property owners of small apartment buildings and rental houses and perhaps some commercial buildings. And these are all people that are getting hit right in the chops, right?
That's right. And most landlords own just a few property. This idea that, property management companies or landlords or, these big corporate entities or big conglomerates, that's really not the case. Most people are like my clients. They're just mom and pops. They have a couple of properties. This is how they make a living. And this is how they're a part of the middle class. And, the agency has really just decided that it's up to them to finance the pandemic for everyone else. And, it hurts them. And look, it's going to hurt tenants in the end, because what's going to happen is this moratorium is going to end one way or the other someday. And suddenly, all of those people who haven't paid rent for 2 years they're going to face eviction, and they're going to owe all this money that they can't pay back, and they're going to go out on the housing market. And, that is just going to be a disaster. That's a disaster for tenants. It's a disaster for property owners. And it's one that was created by the CDC.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
Yeah.
All right, Caleb, if people want to follow you and they want to keep up with this case, and among all the other things you guys are out there fighting for the little guy all the time at New Civil Liberties Alliance. Tell people where to find you and where to find your organization.
So the best way is going to our website. It's nclalegal.org. If you just Google New Civil Liberties Alliance, I'm sure it'll come up. You can sign up for our newsletter, which has information about all of our litigation. It gives you case updates. And if you go to our website, there's a ton of information about this case and all the other cases that we have going on.
I love the newsletter, by the way. Hey, and if they want to keep up with Caleb, you're out there too, right?
I am, and I'm on Twitter, Kruckenberg ESQ. So I read my tweets at your discretion, but I'm out there talking about my work.
It's not all rocket science. Fred Holland.